The year is 2026. The already divided United States breaks apart. At first, it looks like a political standoff. Governors ignore new federal orders. Some National Guard commanders stop answering Washington entirely. Then, energy networks break down, trade stops, and military bases lock down under local control. Within weeks, the world's most powerful nation splits in two. Fuel, food, and geography decide who sides with whom. So, how does it end this time? Two great alliances form almost on their own. The first calls itself the Federal Coalition, stretching from the Pacific to the Great Lakes and the Northeast Corridor. California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, Delaware, New Jersey, New York, the New England states, and D.C. It holds most of America's tech industry, ports, and about 60% of the GDP. Silicon Valley, Boeing, Lockheed, Wall Street, it's all here. But it's an economy built on long supply lines, imported fuel, and fragile grids. The second alliance rises from the interior. The Continental Alliance, centered on Texas, pulls in Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas, Tennessee, Missouri, Kentucky, Kansas, Iowa, Utah, Idaho, Wyoming, the Dakotas, Nebraska, Montana, West Virginia, the Carolinas, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, and Mississippi. Together, they control every major oil field and refinery in the country, plus half of its farmland. They don't have as much tech, but they can run tanks and feed people almost indefinitely. Two states stand apart. Alaska seizes the moment to go independent, while Hawaii stays neutral, far away from the conflict. So now there are two Americas, and naturally, both are convinced they're the real one. And before a single shot is fired, geography already decides the odds. The Continental Alliance inherits the Army's core. Fort Hood, Fort Benning, and Eglin Air Force Base all lie inside its borders. Texas also takes control of Fort Bliss, which sits right on the New Mexico border. Dozens of armored brigades, B-1 bombers, and hundreds of attack helicopters now answer to local commands. The Federal Coalition holds the oceans. San Diego and Bremerton anchor part of the Pacific Fleet. Norfolk and Groton guard the Atlantic. California alone hosts several carrier groups, but their escorts are spread across federal ports and need constant fuel and support to stay at sea. The coalition also keeps the country's cyber and space infrastructure, Maryland's NSA backbone, Colorado's Space Command, and most major communications networks. This won't necessarily be about who fires first, but about who can keep things running. In the east, North Carolina and Virginia become front lines overnight. At Fort Bragg, something unprecedented happens. The 82nd Airborne Division splits in two. Half its officers side with the Federal Coalition, half remain loyal to the Continental Command. Armored columns push up I-95 towards Washington and Philadelphia, trying to seize the industrial corridor before it can fully mobilize. But cities slow everything. Every bridge and overpass becomes a choke point. Tanks can't maneuver through suburbs, and drone strikes turn whole neighborhoods into fire zones. In the Midwest, the Mississippi and Ohio rivers become the front line. Continental forces from Missouri and Texas push east, trying to cross into Illinois and Ohio to seize the rail hubs and farmland to keep the federal states supplied. Illinois and Ohio mobilize their National Guards, fortify every bridge, and destroy key crossings to slow the advance. Federal defenders even sink some grain barges intentionally to keep supplies from falling into enemy hands. Out west, California sends Marines and mountain troops east to defend the Colorado River, the lifeline that supplies much of the coast's water and power. Hoover Dam becomes a fortress. Losing it would mean blackouts from Los Angeles to San Diego. Continental forces advance from Texas through seized parts of New Mexico and Colorado, linking up with troops from Utah. Their goal? Seize the river corridor and choke off the coast's power. But the mountains turn every mile into a tough fight. However, the real conflict isn't on the front lines. It's in the supply lines. And fuel comes first, obviously. Texas and Louisiana are home to much of America's refining, producing a large share of the nation's gasoline and jet fuel. When those pipelines stopped, the Federal Coalition's aircraft and ships began rationing immediately. JP-8 jet fuel and diesel become the new currency. The coalition still controls some refinery capacity on the West Coast, but it isn't enough to replace Gulf output. So it looks like imports from farther north, Alaska and Canada. But that creates another problem. Any large shipments naturally become a major target for Continental Alliance's missiles. Food comes next. The Continental Alliance holds much of the traditional farm belt. States like Kansas, Nebraska, and the Dakotas still produce massive amounts of corn, wheat, and soy. But the federal coalition isn't necessarily starving either. Illinois, Ohio, and the Great Lakes states still grow plenty. And hey, California's Central Valley is one of the most productive regions on Earth. So the problem isn't food itself, it's distribution. With rail lines cut, fuel running low, and key rivers caught in the fighting, getting crops from farms to cities becomes the real challenge. Store shelves go empty, not because there's no food, but because the collapse of logistics. Power comes last. The U.S. grid splits into 3 regional networks: Western, Eastern, and Texas. When the coordination breaks down, large sections of the Northeast lose power. California and the Northwest rely on hydro and solar, but winter demand quickly outpaces what they can produce. Even nuclear plants in states like Illinois and New York risk shutting down if their cooling systems or supply chains are disrupted. Within 6 months, most major cities are dealing with recurring blackouts. Another big difference from the 19th century is that there is a whole new world online, and that changes too. Fort Meade's Cyber Command stays with the federal coalition, but even the southern tech hubs can count on many private engineers who once worked on Pentagon systems. The first attacks hit hospitals, power grids, and freight networks. When satellites fail, both sides fall back on shortwave radios and whatever fiber networks still work. Within weeks, even the internet splits in two. The federal side runs BlueNet. The continental side builds LoneNet. For the first time, Americans on opposite sides of the same country can't even access the same web, or the same truth. Information becomes the weapon of propaganda, used to recruit new fighters and control what people believe. Another factor that we shouldn't ignore: armed civilians. There are about 400 million guns already in private hands across the country. The Continental Alliance has the clear advantage here. Southern and rural states already have some of the highest gun ownership rates in the country, up to 60 or even 70% in parts of Texas, Alabama, and Montana. That means millions of armed civilians, many with military or hunting experience, ready to form local militias or defend their towns. The federal coalition has fewer weapons in private hands. Urban states like New York, New Jersey, and California average closer to 15 to 25% ownership. But even that still adds up to millions of armed civilians. Obviously, organizing those people and giving them at least basic training is another major task. A logistical problem that has to be solved because without it, they could do more harm than good. By the second year, neither side is exactly winning, but one is starving slower. The Continental Alliance's oil and farmland keeps its war machine running. In simple terms, tanks are still rolling and planes are still flying. Cities keep running too, but only under tight rationing. The federal coalition has the technology, but not the fuel or materials to keep it all running. Power grids strain and blackouts roll through Chicago and Boston. Los Angeles shuts streetlights off to save energy. In Seattle and San Francisco, protests break out as shelves empty and supply trucks stop coming. The Mississippi kind of turns into America's version of the Iron Curtain. Southern Abrams units keep higher operational rates. Half of those in the north sit cold for lack of fuel. And cold months make the whole situation only worse. By late 2028, both sides are running out of spare parts. Broken tanks are taken apart to repair others. Grounded aircraft are stripped for electronics. Repair crews and machinists are now more valuable than soldiers. The battle is being fought as much in workshops as it is on the battlefield. By mid-2029, the conflict reaches a breaking point. 3 outcomes remain. The first, and most likely, is a continental victory. With oil, farmland, and heavy industry on its side, the interior simply outlasts the coasts. After a long blockade, most federal states accept a ceasefire that reunites the country under continental terms. A new capital rises inland, likely Dallas. The second possibility is a federal recovery. If the northern and western states hold long enough to reopen trade through Canada or the Pacific, they could recover. A coordinated cyber attack hits southern grid operators and pipeline networks, cutting power across the Gulf Coast. Refineries from Houston to Baton Rouge, responsible for nearly half of America's fuel, go dark. Within weeks, Continental Army starts running dry. Several Midwestern states, desperate to restore trade, switch sides. The federal coalition then pushes across the Mississippi and forces reunification under a new constitution. The third and least likely is total collapse. Both sides run out of everything. State governments fall apart as militias and local leaders take over. The map splits into a handful of self-reliant groups. The perfect opportunity for another big world player to step in. But that's for another video. And what happens when history's greatest armies attack a modern US base? Watch the video on your screen now. Thanks for watching.